Welcome to Storytime with the Dangerous Gentleman. Yes, I am the Dangerous Gentleman. No, I did not give myself that nickname, but I certainly did earn it. Today I'm going to talk about one of the most impactful days of any man's life, and that's the day he becomes a father. That was September the 8th of 2010 for me. That was the day my son Andy was born. I'm going to set a little context before I get into the specifics of that day because it's kind of a unique story. So growing up, my dad was a medical doctor, general family practice. So talking about medical stuff at the dinner table was very common. And so he would come home often and talk about his day at the hospital or seeing patients. And he regularly talked about births. Like I said, just part of the conversation. When we moved from Arizona to Washington, to that rural community that I've talked about a few times, it was very common among that demographic of people to have a home birth. And I was like, I don't know what that all meant. It sounded kind of crazy because all my experience and everything that I heard was about kids being born in the hospital. But being a medical professional, my dad was involved with a lot of these home births. Yeah, most people used a midwife, but my dad wasn't usually on call or even at the birth when they happened. And so as we went along, the whole idea of home birth became much more a part of the dynamic. And so it was something we talked about a lot. And it was just something that became very normal to me as I grew up. Home birth. Everyone has their babies at home. Why would you go to the hospital? That's crazy. And so for me, it became more common to talk about home birth than it did hospital birth. Then I went away to chiropractic school. And if you're in chiropractic circles very long, you find out that most chiropractors are very pro home birth. And so that got drilled into me even more. So then I got married, and me and my wife, we wanted to have kids pretty early on. We didn't want to wait. We figured there's no point in really waiting. So we got married in June of 2009. Somewhere around November, I remember sitting in bed and my wife asking me, "Hey, Andrew, could you go get me some yogurt and a can of tuna fish?" And I thought, that sounds really weird. A month later, Christmas morning, she gives me a little gift bag with a positive pregnancy test. And then that yogurt and tuna fish, that made all kinds of sense. My wife didn't grow up with the idea of home birth. She very much grew up with the idea that if she was ever going to have a baby, it was going to be in the hospital. Her sister was a mom. She had seen her sister have a baby in the hospital and all that kind of stuff. And it was just in her family, that was the way you go, that the common medical route. So for me, starting to talk about that with her was like a foreign language. But over time, I would talk to her more and more about it. I would tell her stories that I had heard about home birth and hospital births and all that stuff. One of these days, I'm going to get into, maybe on another podcast, I'll talk about my perspectives on birth. But let's just say that for most of human history, and even now for a huge chunk of the world, hospital birth is not the normal. In the West, hospital birth is the way to go, with all the interventions and the injections and the monitors and the inductions and the 1 out of 3 pregnancies ending in a C-section. And like I said, I won't even get into all that. One of these days, I will put that all together, and that will be a whole separate podcast. But let's just say it took a little convincing to get my wife on board with the whole idea of home birth. But then once she did, she jumped in with both feet, and she started talking about it. And we even took a class in home childbirth, and she was so excited about it. And we started to go see a midwife rather than a doctor. And she starts to hear more and more from them about the positives of home birth and the negatives of hospital birth and all that stuff. And I'm not going to criticize anyone who's used a hospital birth. If you went that way, cool. But home birth, I'll get into why home birth was so amazing for me and for us as we go through this. Okay, so we're going along through. Now, like I said, my wife, she got on board with the home birth. Her mom, different story. She never really supported that decision of ours. Even though she knew I was a medical professional, even though she knew that I knew at least a little bit about what I was doing and that we had excellent care and all that stuff, she just, even up until the very end, she was still like, "Are you sure you don't want to just go to the hospital? You still could. You could still go to the hospital." But by that time, we were set, and I'm very glad that my wife was fully 100% on board because she could follow her mom's opinion sometimes. But she was fully on board, and she would tell her mom, "Hey, no, mom, this is the decision that we made." So as we went along, things were going great. Things were going smooth. Everything was good. We were having discussions about a name. And so my ex wife, my kid's mom, she didn't want to name my kid after me. I wanted to name my kid after me. First of all, we thought we were going to have a girl, but that's a story for another day. So, but when we thought about the idea of having a boy, I wanted to name my son after me. I always thought it would be cool to have a little junior. She didn't want a junior. And so she wouldn't let me name him Andrew. But one day, so my grandma, when we were little, my grandma painted us, each one of her grandkids, these little chairs. She was a teacher and she was a painter. So she was very good at painting. So she painted us each one of these chairs with our name on it. And mine said Andy on the top of it. It didn't say Andrew, it said Andy. And so one day she saw that chair and she's like, "Oh, if we name him Andrew, can we just call him Andy?" And I said, "Of course." So we named him Andrew. Andrew Stephen Paul, which is my name, her dad's name, and then my dad's name. But he's never been anything but Andy. From the day he was born until now, he's 13 years old. I'm going to be 14 this year. Oh my gosh, I mean to be father of a 14-year-old. Anyway, he's been Andy. Everyone calls him Andy. No one has called him anything else. I was Andy when I was little. Then I became Andrew. I've been Drew. I've been Drewski. And I've been a whole bunch of different things. But he's been Andy from day one. So his due date, his original due date, was September the 1st. And so September the 1st came. We're going to see the midwife. And she's checking everything. And she's like, "Oh, yeah, she's a little bit dilated, but she's just not quite ready to go." And so by that time, they're seeing her more and more frequently and like a little few contractions here and there, but nothing too major. So I wake up, and here now it's September the 8th, and we're a week late. So I went to work that morning. Not really much going on. She's just the same old, same old. I get a call about an hour after I got to work. I started at 6:30 in the morning, so this was like 7:30. She's like, "I think my water broke." I'm like, "Oh, okay." And I went on with my day. She didn't present it like it was any kind of big thing, and I didn't take it as any kind of big thing. It was like, "Oh, well, let me know if things progress and I'll come home." And I'm walking around the office and I'm starting to just feel this weight, and I'm starting to like, oh, I'm kind of panicking a little bit, and I'm kind of starting to just have these I'm about to become a dad probably today. That weight just started to hit me. And my office manager comes up and she pulls me aside into one of the rooms and she's like, "Andrew, go home and be with your wife." And I was like, "Okay, all right, you're right." So I jump in my car and I sped home. And I got home and my wife is cleaning the house. And if there's one thing that they always told us is when the birthing process starts, when labor starts, rest as much as you can because you're going to need your energy later. Even if you feel like doing things, just rest, just sit down and rest. So here I am, I'm sitting on the couch, like trying to keep it together. And she's up and she's cleaning the house. I'm like, "Sit down." She's like, we're probably going to have company later. The midwife's going to come and I want the house to be clean. I'm like, "Sit down." And she never really did. So she's just up cleaning the house. And I'm calling the midwife. The midwife said, "So how are things going?" "Things are going okay." "All right. All right. Well, let us know if anything changes." "All right." So things are starting to progress a little bit. And she decides that she wants to get in the bathtub. So she gets in the bathtub, nice hot bath for her, and she sits in the bathtub for a while. And I'm calling the midwife about every 45 minutes to an hour. And I think that because the midwife knew that I had medical training, she was just allowing me to just do my thing and to check on things. And she was not in a panic. And I am like, "When's the midwife going to get here?" And so finally, about 6 o'clock, 5:30, 6 o'clock that evening, the midwife and her assistant show up. And so Danielle's still in the tub and she's going through the labor process and all that stuff. She gets up, walks around a little bit. They check her. Things are going okay. We get fresh hot water in the bathtub. She climbs back in. And then maybe about 7 o'clock, she's like, "All right, I think things are starting to get a little intense." In the meantime, I'm leaning over the bathtub holding her hand, and she's squeezing it with every contraction, and my hand is cramping, and I'm trying to maintain my composure because my hand really hurts. And so after a while, they're like, all right, we think it's time. So they have her get out of the bathtub, and immediately, like, contractions hit, everything ramped up. And so between the time when she got out of the bathtub and when my son Andy was born, it was like 20 minutes. And I caught him. And they're like, hey, Andrew, this is you. You're dad. You know what you're doing. And I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. But they're like watching me. And I'm the one that's like trying to work him out. And they're like, Andrew, just do this and do this. And then pretty soon, one last push, squeeze, and boom. I'm holding my son. Well, I don't know he's a son yet because we didn't check all that. We just had boy name, girl name picked out. So here I am. I'm just like, I'm like overwhelmed. And I set him on my wife's chest, and they're just like, he's breathing and all that stuff, and he's crying. And it's like, and then the midwife is like, well, aren't you going to check to see what it is? And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess that's important. So I literally like lift up his leg and I'm like, it's a boy. And we both, like, me and my wife, were just had this moment, and we're crying, and we're like, and we have little Andy, 8 pounds, 8 ounce Andy, born September 8th, 2010, home birth. My mom was there. The dog was outside, but my mom was kind of around in the background. She was kind of just keeping an eye on things. And but there we were, holding our little baby boy. Did all the things, let the cord drain, and then cut the cord, weighed him, nursed him. Then my mom cleaned up the house, and the midwives cleaned up the room. And then it was pretty glorious because all that happened then was we went to sleep. My wife laid down, I laid down, we put our son in between us, and we went to sleep about 9 o'clock that night. So baby was born about 7:30. We went to bed by 9 o'clock. And the only thing different, here we were in our bed. We were in our house. The house was clean. No one else was there with me and her. And now we had this little baby, and it was the most glorious and wonderful feeling. We could have ended up in the hospital and been sleeping in the hospital with our son in a nursery and all that stuff and been separated. But no, we chose home birth, and it was a pretty amazing journey. I could get into a lot about all this. I just wanted to share the story of my son's birth. A pretty impactful thing for me, like becoming a father and doing it at home in that glorious and wonderful environment. And literally, like I said, we woke up that morning and 2 of us in the house, went to bed, and there were 3 of us. And that was, I say, the only difference. It's a pretty big difference, but it was really like, we didn't have to worry about going back and forth to the hospital. My son was perfectly healthy and happy and normal, and my wife pushed for a grand total of like 12 or 13 minutes. I delivered him. I'm the one that caught him. I'm the one that cut his cord. I'm the one that got to check to see whether it was a boy or girl. I'm the one that got to say, this is Andy. It was a glorious experience, and there's been a lot of stuff that's happened since then, but that particular day still is one of the most powerful days of my life. And the birth of each of my children is very, very special and unique in vastly different ways. And I'll tell those stories on upcoming podcasts, but I just wanted to share that story of me becoming a dad and little Andy coming into the world. And so it's pretty cool. I hope you at least enjoyed that story, and I hope maybe you get something out of it, like to consider different choices when it comes to birth and just the glory of becoming a parent. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed listening, because I certainly enjoyed telling it. I will talk at you later.